Now, US President Donald Trump has repeated his long-held views on climate change, calling it and the concept of a carbon footprint a hoax by ill-intentioned people. Trump called on the countries of the world to abandon green transition projects and take advantage of the potential of fossil fuels in growing their economies. Now, for more on this, let's now bring in Zaki Mamdoo, who is the coordinator for the Stop East African Crude Pipeline of oil. Zaki, thank you so much for your time this evening here in SABC News. Let's start off here and get your reaction. Once again, Donald Trump calling, the issues around climate change a hoax, going as far as calling on countries to abandon, some of their green transition projects. What is your take on some of the comments that he has made?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me on the program. I think the reality here is that what Trump is doing must very much be seen as narrative warfare. And I don't think it can be dismissed as, kind of crazy Trumpism or eccentricity. Because in many ways, his remarks are, while they exist as political theater, they are very much a signal with material consequence to the fossil fuel industry, signaling that that he himself is giving them the political backing that they need. So in calling climate action a con job, he is licensing deregulation, and he is telling oil and gas firms that he's giving them this political backing that emboldens them. It emboldens not only the fossil fuel industry itself, but also banks, financiers, investor cartels, and insurers to keep backing and financing the destruction of our natural world, of course, but importantly, the exploitation of our people, of our communities, and of our natural resources. And so by all means, what he is doing is signaling very clearly his alignment to a certain faction of capital, a faction of capital which, by the way, bankrolled his presidential campaign. And in return, he is offering them deregulation on a silver platter. Or at least promises of deregulation. So, in very real terms, it is a transaction that we are witnessing unfold, a transaction which is part of a grander U.S. imperial strategy to solidify its energy dominance and its geopolitical power and corporate super profits at the expense of the many.
And I mean, Zaki, what does it do to the likes of the efforts being done by many countries in the world? I mean, you'd remember that there was a Paris Agreement that was signed to ensure that, over some time, we do get rid of fossil fuels and the use of fossil fuels the world over. What does it do to those kind of, the efforts being done to rid the world of fossil fuels when you have a superpower president, saying these remarks on a global platform?
Sure. Well, I think it's certainly undermining of the gains that have been made, gains which, were not handed down to people by the benevolence of the of a global elite, but rather gains that were hard fought for. And won by the workers' movement, by communities who are reeling from the impacts of extraction on their doorstep, And so the posture that Trump, and that his presidency and his office is putting forward is one which legitimizes new extractivism and a renewed onslaught, especially across the broader global south. And we see it with renewed backing for projects like the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, which has, displaced over 100,000 people in Uganda and Tanzania already, and which is creating a massive socioeconomic crisis. We see it with the support for projects like the LNG projects in Mozambique, for example, which is directly linked to incredibly violent conflict that communities there are reeling from as well. And so, of course, as with any kind of colonial plunder and pillaging, communities and ordinary people are left to shoulder the entirety of the social, the environmental costs, the violence, the crisis of climate collapse, while multinationals pocket the profits and the global elite laughs their way to the bank at the expense of everyone else who is treated as a pawn, in their game.
And how far are we as a globe, in terms of trying to get rid of the use of fossil fuels? I mean, this is a project, that has been going on for a number of years. And what are the challenges which you have come across the way when it comes to, eventually seeing a phasing out of fossil fuels?
Sure. Look, I think part of the challenge is, in fact, the emphasis that is placed on multilateral conferences like COP to be the spaces through which change is delivered. Because by all means, we need to understand that these spaces, including the UN as an institution itself, is not designed to rupture with the system of capitalism, but rather it seeks, and we heard it, in the clip that just played, that it is actively seeking to reform a system that has created the crisis that we are in, right? So, and capitalism always does this. It always reforms in the wake of crisis that threatens it. If that crisis threatens it enough, it seeks to then do the bare minimum to mitigate the worst impacts, only so that it can protect at all times its profitability and the profits of a few, right?
Yeah.
And so they convert crisis into markets, they convert crisis into pledges and into theater. So long as they do this and seek to protect profits, well, then naturally it's a given that the many and ordinary people and working class people across the globe will suffer and will continue to live in conditions of poverty, grappling with the onslaught of exploitation and extraction and everything else. And so really, without organized people's power in Bali, they produce little more than choreography, and these spaces become the auction house for the different factions of capital to bid, and to exercise soft power to ensure that they get to negotiate and navigate the crisis on their own terms, while ordinary people are left out entirely. And so, just to conclude, because I sense we are running short on time.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Mine is just to say that really what needs to happen is for ordinary people the world over to know that we are not passive bystanders watching history pass us by. We need to organize at every level to ensure that we assert ourselves as legitimate stakeholders in our own world and that we fight for the future that we want to build.
All right, Zaki, thank you so much for your time here in SABC News. That's Zaki Mamdoo, is the coordinator for the Stop East African Crude Oil Pipeline there, just giving us some of his reaction to the recent comments there being made by US President Donald Trump.